circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed, deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights, highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left this
Good evening, everyone. This is David. I'm usually behind the scenes producing with Nomiki, but I wanted to come on briefly. Nomiki's not with us tonight. She had some issues with the storm, so we had to dig into the vault for some clips. We actually have some really great ones lined up. But before we go into the content tonight, I wanted to call an audible and show a brief clip for those that may not be aware, and can amplify and share, because we really need to make some noise and hold some folks in Minneapolis accountable. If you haven't been, if the case of the killing of Amir Locke hasn't been brought to your attention yet, I advise trigger warning, but for folks to look into it. It echoes Brianna Taylor's case, unfortunately, and it really does demand some noise be made so that accountability can be called for, and maybe some change can finally happen, because unfortunately Mayor Fri in Minneapolis is doing the same old, pretending to want to make some change, but just giving ear service, and the interim chief is claiming to be stopping no-knock raids by stopping most no-knock raids, but as we know, most isn't all, and we'll just continue the same old problem. So trigger warning, I'm going to show his image first, just so that everyone can put a face to the name of this young man that was killed on February 2nd by Minneapolis police. And I'm just going to share two things, one video and a couple of tweets providing some information. I hate to start it on such a negative note, but I wanted to start it when people would be watching rather than at the end when people may start to fall off. So this is the face of Amir Locke, and he was killed on February 2nd, second day of Black History Month, by Minneapolis police in a no-knock raid. I'm going to go to a video briefly. I'm only going to play the slow motion version with audio because it's less triggering. The end of it shows it in real time, which is literally under 2 seconds. But I'm not going to play that part with audio. I'm going to mute it so that it's a little less triggering, and hopefully the algorithm doesn't catch it as well. So here we go. And again, your discretion is advised. If you need to look away for about a minute, please do. It can upset. It can be very upsetting. And coming up is the real-time one. I meant to mute it before the bullet, so I'm sorry about that. They rush in, shout, and before anything. So go check out Georgia Fort's social media. She's been on top of it. She's in Minneapolis. You can check out Benjamin Dixon on Twitter. He's amplifying and sharing it as well. There's one other piece of information from someone that I wanted to share, just to give some information, and the Nomiki Show's Twitter has shared it, so you can also find all of this on our Twitter account. But the police, the information coming out of Minneapolis completely twists everything and lies. So according to Will Stansel on Twitter, and his Twitter tag is WH Stansel, body cam shows almost everything MPD told us about Amir Locke's killing is a lie. The officers snuck into the apartment, did not announce themselves, surprised him, and he did not aim a weapon at the officers. He did pick up his gun, which he was a licensed owner of, so it was legal, but he didn't aim it at them. He didn't have time to. The shots fired were, of course, from MPD, and he was not a suspect in the no-knock raid. The other thing I wanted to highlight from Stansel that he points out is the time between Locke opening his eyes to find himself surrounded by shouting armed men and Locke being shot to death was under 2 seconds. So, just again, this is about Amir Locke, who was killed on February 2nd. I'll try to, there we go, put his face up again. We really need to amplify and make some noise because this isn't normal and should never be normalized. On that note, I'm going to play some music for about a minute just so that we can hopefully get back into some sort of regular vibe. And we do have some great clips to play. I don't want to harp on this for too long and bring everyone down, but I spoke with Nomiki and we wanted to just bring this to everyone's attention for anyone that may not already know.
Momentarily for class solidarity, cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed, deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
So many of you have written in about wanting to learn more about how power works, how to organize, and how to move forward really after Bernie Sanders has stepped out of the primary. Where do we go from here now that we don't have a movement leader to guide us? Well, it turns out it is on us, and many of us have to start learning very quickly, especially those who just joined the movement or are younger. You know, our futures depend on you. So one of the tasks that we do with this show is we want to reach out to experts and learn very quickly how to utilize the power that we do have. And I don't think there could be a better expert than the person who probably understands power the most and has had quite a bit of success and has written about it, Jane McAlevey. She is a lifelong activist and organizer, especially around the trade unions. You know her from her books, Raising Expectations and Raising Hell, No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power, and her most recent book, A Collective Bargain, Unions Organizing and the Fight for Democracy, which is so much bigger right now than we probably would have anticipated a couple of weeks ago. Jane, thank you so much for joining us. I know we had a few technical glitches, so hopefully we can say all the wonderful and go even further this time around.
I'm so happy to be talking to you. It's great.
You know, I think I'm just going to start with the obvious question. What power do we have right now in the movement?
Yeah. I mean, I think the good news is we have the same power right now that we had, 3 or 4 or 5 weeks ago. That's the truth. And the power we have is our capacity to unite together and stand up and fight like crazy. That hasn't changed. I mean, having a candidate to coalesce around, I think sometimes is convenient. It's helpful. It gives focus to our work. But the truth is, what was interesting, and I think one of the best things about Bernie Sanders, is that he himself was clear, and he consistently messaged that even if he had won, it would have taken a gargantuan movement in the streets to actually move policy. That fact hasn't changed. So whether it's Biden or whoever, it's going to take the same amount of heat in the streets as it was going to take if it was Bernie. It's just, do we face, tanks and bulldozers, or do we not? And who knows what Trump would do if Trump is reelected, which is a frightening thought, but by the way, one that I keep at the front of my head every day, because I think we have to be realistic. The Democrats are inept. They've spent the last 45 years undermining their own electoral base. That's the destruction of the trade unions. The most capable part of the base that elected Democrats at the local level, state level, and federally, for 80, 90 years in this country, they've just been systematically destroying. So whether or not the Democrats can pull off November, I think it's a huge question right now. I mean, I really think that Sanders was the candidate to beat Trump. It's obvious that the party itself was going to do damage to him, which they just did. But he was certainly a better candidate to go up against Trump. The COVID disaster, which is ongoing, may give us an opening to actually take down Trump with even a shitty candidate, which is what we're left with at the moment. So, because I think with 17 million people filing unemployment claims, that's 17 million people filing unemployment claims. And I saw an estimate this morning that 20%, we're at 20% unemployment in the United States right now, 20%. We're going to be close to Great Depression numbers. And quite honestly, what happened in the Great Depression is that FDR was elected. And FDR was not, it wasn't like people elected FDR thinking that he was the Bernie Sanders of the time, or realizing that he was going to become the FDR that he became. And that's what I take comfort from. Let's imagine we elect Biden. Just imagine that the crisis is so deep that people finally get really angry. And what I'm hoping, by the way, the scenario I'm hoping for is that the pandemic calms down, soon, next couple of months. We're allowed back out. Because I think what's going to happen when we're allowed back out is that there's going to be a wave of strikes in this country that's going to make 2018 and 2019 look tame. And I think it's going to be in the healthcare sector. And I think that nurses, registered nurses who are being asked to kill themselves right now, and hospital workers, every tech, everyone moving a ventilator around, everyone touching them, every healthcare worker who is behaving like every firefighter, but he's not going to get that kind of recognition, by the way, they're just not. Let's just have a gender discussion at some point. But every nurse and hospital worker running into work right now with no protective equipment on because they believe in saving people, which is the same exact dynamic of a firefighter running into a burning house. Like, that's what every nurse and hospital worker has been asked to do for the last month in this country with no protective equipment. And what I'm hearing from the thousands of people that I've spent my life helping organize in the healthcare sector is we should prepare for like tires burning in the street. And it'd be nice, by the way, if we could get a more ecologically perfect thing to burn. But I really think that there's going to be a fight back that's going to be fierce. And I think that the 2 years of strikes that we saw in 2018 and 2019, like, set the stage, reminded a whole new generation of workers who haven't seen strikes, that when this is over and we can all come out again and they start moving the austerity, cut back, roll back, we're going to make all you people pay again, we're going to make the working class pay for the failures of the 1% again, I think it's going to be a kind of a hell no. I think if we do our work right, and this is where the energy of a lot of the Sanders campaigners, I hope, go, and the supporters go, is into unleashing a flurry of strikes in this country. Learning how to do strike support, learning how to jump in there and actually get the whole community behind what I anticipate is going to be some strikes coming out of the healthcare sector, strikes in the education sector. We know we're seeing strikes in sort of the just-in-time logistics sector. Those three sectors are like the most important sectors there are right now in this country. And 2 out of 3 of them, which is healthcare, and education. I think 2 out of 3 of them have the capacity and are primed to go. I think in the logistics sector, there's an amazing potential for power, coming back to the power discussion, and we're in the power discussion, but really being clear about power. The logistics sector, the Amazon, all the just-in-time stuff, the delivery people, that's got great potential for power, but we haven't seen it realized yet because the infrastructure has not been there yet for people.
Right, you have the national nurses, you have the teachers unions, which especially the membership base is very educated in how to organize, and they're right. More radical than, say, like SEIU, which the members are, but the leadership is not quite there.
Yeah, leadership of most of the national unions, by the way, as evidenced by, did you see, I'm sorry, it's the first time I'm talking about it in public, we should talk about it for a minute. Did you read that opinion piece that 4 labor leaders published in the USA Today several years ago? Yes, you're rolling your eyes, so is everyone I know. I mean, if that's an indication of what the national leadership's position is right now, to like celebrate a handful of capitalists for
throwing out candy. I don't know.
Sitting down and talking about following safety protocols, it was an outrageous opinion piece. And so I think honestly from the bottom up, which is where the strike activity has been coming for the last couple of years, if we see an increase in that, if we see local players and local and regional and state level workers taking action in the education and healthcare sectors, where I think it's really possible, I think it's going to get really interesting. And I think that actually has the potential to shift the balance of power heading into the election, but more important, coming out of the election. Like, part of what I think needs to happen in terms of the power structure analysis, in fact, I think, honestly, the thing that has to happen, given the current power analysis and the austerity that's coming, is way more strikes as fast as possible. In 1932, so when FDR wins in 1932, and I outlined this in a collective bargain in a really succinct chapter, the election happens in 32. Progressives weren't rallying around FDR. Like, he could have been Biden, I guess, on a bad day. Or I don't know.
He was an oligarch. I mean, it's not like, we have to remember, He turned on the people who basically got him elected.
Exactly. And then what happened was the smart leftists in the trade union movement, who were mostly not in unions, who mostly didn't have the right to unionize. It's pre the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, and it's what leads to it, is they decide in key geographic areas of the United States and in key sectors. So those are 2 words, key geographies, key sectors. This is power structure analysis. They made the decision to start holding massive strikes. They essentially brought I saw a series of mini general strikes happened in 1932, 1933, and 1934, which most people don't know a thing about, because most people think National Labor Relations Act passes, and if they think at all about this, right? They think 1935 National Labor Relations Act passes under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, key part of the New Deal, leaves out a bunch of people, Black people, okay, some gender issues there, but a lot of people get the right to strike for the first time, a lot more than didn't have it, get the right to strike. In theory, it's a theoretical right to strike under the National Relations Act. And so 36 happens, and you see 36 and 37 in Detroit, Flint, the streets, the auto sector, the sit-down strikes. Most people think that's how it began, but it actually began in 32, 33, and 34 with the illegal strikes that happened in the cities where leftists in the labor movement calculated, 1, workers were ready to go across sectors, like in Minneapolis, like in Seattle, like in Oakland, right, in key geographic areas. And that 2, that the sort of troops, the dogs, the hoses, and the guns would not be called out on them in certain key areas. That's the same power analysis we need to do right now. Where are the places in this country this time next year, let alone this summer and this fall, right, challenging the election itself, but like even after the election, because we know this crisis is not ending tomorrow, where are the places where we think at the base level, there's enough workers ready to go in enough sectors to start causing what union organizers like to call a serious crisis? Like, how do we create a crisis for capital?
Well, it is. I mean, a state like New York, just to, we've seen a lot of this happen in red states, which is powerful. But some of them are right to work states, and you have Wisconsin, which of course has a long history of this power struggle. Even though there's such Republican rule there, and it's like the test case. They test everything out there. But in a state like New York, which is a union state, it's democratically run, Democratic governors, legislature and Senate and city, that seems like a prime place, especially with COVID, especially because the communities that are affected are our frontline, I mean, part of the reason why you've got that belt from Queens to Brooklyn is because so many of the people who are out there delivering are being, put in contact with it, or they don't have access to the right medical care, or there's underlying health issues. So, I mean, these are the workers. These are literally the workers. So in a state like New York, wouldn't you think that that kind of power would push up against people like Cuomo, where they would have to respond because that is their base? It's not like the Republicans that don't have strong labor rules.
I think so. And mostly I think it'll be hard. I mean, look, Cuomo is no real friend of working people. Sorry. Right. Sorry to break the news to everyone.
No, we've covered that one on the show.
Not a surprise on your show. I know. It's a surprise for a lot of people, though. Whenever I say that, Cuomo, are you kidding me? Like, the guy is gutting Medicaid as the COVID crisis is happening, whatever. So, but what he's not going to have the capacity to do, I don't believe, is call out the National Guard against nurses in scrubs and healthcare workers and educators on the streets of New York or frankly in upstate. There's plenty of heat in Buffalo, by the way. There's some amazing nurse organizing going on up there and other work. So I think that's what I mean by power and power structure analysis. If we start, and if the generation coming out of the Bernie campaign starts to really analyze where are the places that workers can be ready to go, how can people who are not yet in the union start building alliances right now, start building operations to bring the broader community into the fight, right? Because that's key. Every big strike, if we don't have the entire public with us, we're not going to win, right? Like, we actually need the public on the streets with us. Really strong unions like the Los Angeles teachers were able to bring the community with them because they had strategically been working with the community for several years leading up to that strike. And they still are. And there's a lot of unions who are smart at the local level and really realizing, including even SIU locals. I mean, this is the dynamic about the American labor movement that's really important for people to understand. There's the national position holders. They hold positions. Then there's the leadership and the rank and file out in the field. And in a lot of places, the rank and file leadership has kind of had it. You know what I mean? And they're looking around the country and going, Marriott, the United Here workers won the Marriott strike. The educators are winning the educator strikes, red state and blue states. Even the AT&T workers pulled off a victory in 9 southern states. There's a lot of the United Food and Commercial Workers and the Stop and Shop strike in New England. I have to say that's an example where a union was not really ready. That union was not really ready for the Stop and Shop strike in any way compared to, like, the LA teachers were ready for their strike, or the Oakland teachers, or the fall Chicago teachers in their magnificent rerun of the strike again this past fall. There's some unions that are really ready for it. They're building for it. They're getting ready. There are some unions, and I think in some ways analyzing power and the fights to come, where it's just, if we're honest, which I think everyone can be and must be in these moments, they weren't. The United Food and Commercial Workers were not ready for the Stop and Shop strike. And here's what happened, which was magnificent. And it's a sign of things to come, I hope, as someone who has lived through 2.5 decades of internecine warfare among unions. What happened in the New England Stop and Shop strike was that a lot of unions around New England who are well organized saw that strike coming and literally threw down and said, we're going to put all the internecine warfare aside. And there's a really strong state federation of labor in Massachusetts. Again, kind of rare. There's actually a strong one in Maine. There's a handful of places where the state federations of labor function like they're supposed to. And it started in Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts Federation of Labor, which is actually a pretty decent statewide federation, said, everyone cut the bullshit. Everyone stop fighting. Everyone in the unions in this state that knows how to actually strike is going to go help those workers win. And there was a huge act of solidarity that broke out where the organizers from the nurses unions, the organizers from the building trades are progressive and good up in Boston, like a whole bunch of highly skilled organizers kind of quietly just like threw down and went to help the workers in the Stop and Shop struggle, which is part of why people pulled it off. That's one. So solidarity, as we know, solidarity works. Two, it was people trading skill sets. Two, the public completely rose up around those workers in the Stop and Shop struggle, which should be an indicator to the food supply chain of what's coming for them too. The public, before COVID, before we were asking grocery store workers to give up their life to collect cash to feed people, right? Like, people were already siding with the Stop and Shop workers. People have been siding in red states and blue states with workers on strike. I think the public is ready to support people, but that needs to be organized, right? You can't just be like, oh, there's public support. And this is where the Bernie a lot of the Bernie energy, I hope, is going to go is into both going into workplaces that are strategic. So what should young people who are working for Bernie, who might need to go into the workforce still do? Go into the logistics sector, go into the healthcare sector, go into the education sector. They will continue to be strategic sectors moving forward, where people can come in, get good training, and figure out how to lead a new wave of massive strikes in this country, because we're going to need it. That's the power analysis. If you look at the Supreme Court, shift to the next, we're done. Like the Supreme Court is going to undo like 50 years of settled law. They've already done some of it. They're going to do more of it. So the courts are done. Just forget. I feel like the courts are just done.
I mean, forget the fight over the courts, just to be clear.
No. Just give up on the idea that lawsuits and advocacy work anymore. You know what I mean? Like, forget it. No, we should fight about the courts, but like, we don't have anywhere near the power we need to fight. You know, we just got to keep building the base right now. And so all those lawsuits, all the advocacy strategies, I mean, McConnell owns the federal bench at this point, practically, right, with the number of judges he's been appointing. So the judicial system is going to be a disaster for us for a long time. Your lifetime, my lifetime, sorry to say it, for a lot of lifetimes, it's going to be a bad court. And the electoral process, like, it's like a chicken and egg thing of like, Jane, I always say to people, well, how are you going to do it? And they say, well, we just need to overturn Citizens United and get campaign financing correct. And I'm like, okay, and what's your plan for that?
Yeah.
There's really only one plan right now, and the plan involves workers taking massive strike actions. And that is still within our reach, and we can still do it.
I want to talk to you a little bit about how we got here, too, because I think so much of this comes down to really your coming of age, where your activism has been. You've been right there on the front lines as a witness and opponent to many of the folks who sort of designed, I guess, where we are today. I mean, it's not just that we have neoliberals. We have the Koch brothers who started organizing in the late 70s and early 80s with their money to take over the legislatures, to eventually win over the courts. They knew that the demographics were working against them, as did probably, the neoliberals see now that the demographics, may not necessarily work with them. So they have to out-strategize so that they stay in power, and then they can control the masses, because the demographics are really the masses, right? So looking at like the late 70s and early 80s, this is also the time when unions, there was a crackdown with unions. The Democrats eventually pulled away from putting money into state parties, and that's kind of where that pipeline of talent would come from, where you found the organizers who knew how to fight every single time. And one thing we're hearing from young people right now that were involved with Bernie is, I want to be involved, I just don't know how. And a lot of that is because this pipeline has been completely, it barely exists, let's be honest, with exception to states where there's a real union presence. So how do people develop these skills that you have been teaching? Where do they go first to learn about how to move power?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because the infrastructure really has been decimated in some ways. I mean, let's just say one word about what existed sort of before 1970 on the sort of progressive side, and then come back to like, where can people go? So in my second book, in No Shortcuts, I sort of give this, my whole, it's like my PhD dissertation. I give the whole analysis of like everything I'd learned as an organizer. I just went and then like regurgitated, read a bunch of stuff, and then put it back out into No Shortcuts. And went looking in the academy, like took some time to try and figure out, was my theory that the right wing took all their lessons from the civil rights movement and the trade union movement of the 30s through the late 60s, the right wing sort of said, it's the base, stupid. Like, we actually need to go organize a base of people so that we look legitimate and that there's actually a base out there. They chose two sectors. They sort of built the National Rifle Association to be like a grassroots operation. And if people don't think that's grassroots, they're crazy. That is not grass tops. The NRA is a base organization, right? They've got real people in large numbers who are willing to act. And they built the evangelical church. So at that exact same time, sadly, the progressives kind of do a stupid moment, which is, we're paying the price for it now. And it's why there's no infrastructure and why there's no pipeline. The sort of progressives think, oh, look, okay, we won the Civil Rights Act, we won the Voting Rights Act, we won the Clean Water Act, we won the Clean Air Act, We forced Nixon to sign these things. We've got the Title IX amendments. Women got a few gains in there. Okay, I got to play sports. Happy. I got to play sports. Okay, whatever. Anyway, the things we considered huge victories. But so, and our side said, well, we won all these things. All we have to do now is like hire a bunch of staff, a bunch of lobbyists, move into Washington and implement our federal laws. And we systematically, on our side, began to dismantle the emphasis of base building out in the field. So for about 40 years, we were contributing to our own decline by deprioritizing that which the right wing was prioritizing, which was base building.
Was that because of greed, or was it was it like stupidity? Was it an accident? Was it a lack of foresight? I mean, how could this party that was a union party, let's not forget that they also kicked out union members from the party. Was it because they wanted to concentrate money towards, the ad buyers or something? I mean, that's what it is now.
Yeah. I think it's multiple fold. I think the first big blow was McCarthyism, and I feel like we don't pay enough attention to how much damage that did. So every smart leftist, and certainly I always think to myself, if I was doing the same work then that I've been doing for the last 20 years now, I would have been thrown out of the union and or put in jail, and all the things that happened during that period. So I think we start by understanding that the primary intent of McCarthyism was partly about keeping the Jim Crow South, right? And the weapon for them was to destroy the trade unions, because the trade unions were forcibly helping to integrate the South. This is like part of the story I tell in A Collective Bargain. I go back to the origins of why they were doing what they were doing when McCarthyism begins, 46, 47, 48, 49, and then 50s hit. And they decide, the Jim Crow folks team up again with the corporate right in the North and say, we got to stop these unions because they're taking away your profits and they're integrating the South. And that's a big problem. So they set out to destroy the unions. They create McCarthyism. They make up whether or not you were in the party. It doesn't really matter, right? We know what they did. What most people don't realize is that they gutted 10,000 of the smartest leftists from the trade union movement. So that sets up this period of dull, boring business unionism, where the unions, in the 60s start to play nice, and they think it's like a social compact they have with corporations, and they're just going to keep getting these nice contracts. That was a huge, huge misread of history, as some of the national trade union leaders in the 1960s were thinking, hey, we're going to keep getting these contracts. We can work with these guys now. We've got the framework for being legitimate players in the economy and in politics. Meanwhile, the right was off making plans to launch a second offensive, which was unleashing an army of union busting consultants in the early 1970s that then set up the Reagan election to say, we're going to finally gut the unions, right? And the final wave of that is now with the public sector, Wisconsin, which you were on. But so I think a lot of it was self-inflicted wounds. We actually just did some serious damage to our side, but that damage was set up by McCarthyism taking the left out of the labor movement. So the labor movement becomes a more conservative, more business-oriented force. We have a little glimmer of hope in the 70s from the civil rights movement coming into the public sector of the trade union movement. Then Reagan hits, and that's the next excuse for conservative trade union leaders to think, oh, well, we can't go on strike anymore. They're going to replace all the workers. So it's both real, but it's also an excuse to once again dull down the militancy of the trade union movement. And it's not until 2012 in Chicago, really you have to give them the credit, Chicago teachers 2012, light the fire that takes off in 2018, and I think is lit and running. So now the question is, where do people, but particularly a new generation of young folks, 35 and under were my favorite numbers, really age 35 and under across every racial demographic in the polling. Where do the 35 and under folks go to get training? It's a super important question. They have to look for the unions where strikes have happened. They have to look for the unions where there's serious organization being built, where there's a small d democratic structure inside the union, and it's generally not going to the national unions. And in fact, the national unions aren't even running organizer training programs the way they were even 20 years ago,
wow.
25. Yeah, seriously. At all. In the early 1990s, you could apply for a series of different weekend-long apprenticeship testing programs, a 3-day program to get training where unions would see, okay, this person's kind of good, let's bring him in. a lot of those entry pipelines are gone. So now you have to look around and say, can I go to the being rebuilt Midwest Academy of Organizing in Chicago? I would look there, by the way. I'm saying that. I would like to look there. Can I go to, let's look at all the education unions where there's been strikes. Let's look at Unite Here, a union that consistently strikes, from Marriott strike. Parts of the Communication Workers of America within it, right? It's a complicated union like SEIU is. Some of it totally dynamic. Some of it, needs some work. So I think that people trying to get in need to look at the unions where there's a small d democratic structure. And then honestly, a lot of them need to take jobs in healthcare, logistics, and education. Like actually take jobs in those 3 key strategic sectors where they will continue to be leading sectors of the dominant US economy right now that can't be outsourced that easily. So really where those young folks need to go is in jobs in strategic sectors. And then I would argue, get the training internally, whether it's go to a DSA training, lining them up, going to Midwest Academy, looking at labor notes. Like there's a bunch of places where you can look, get real training. I'm not a shill for I don't care if they photocopy my books. I always say that. Go to the damn library and take it out. It's not about selling them, but you'll get the basic idea of what you're looking for. And it's important to go to the right union, because if you go to the wrong union, not only will you not get trained, you may get really unmotivated.
So that's interesting, because it sort of leads me to this question that is a question that we don't really talk about enough on the left, but I think historically we could see that there's a lot of evidence of this, whether it's the right bringing in union busting consultants who were operating, nobody knew that their colleagues were union busters, or moving all the way through. There's lots of forms of sabotage that those in power will put into organizing. They will try to divide organizers up so that they're not forming solidarity by using, cultural issues or race to divide.
Racism, all of it.
And we see that on the left right now. I mean, I think a lot of young people, we talked about this before, that I don't want to say they're falling for it, but there's a lot of provoked language out there, and sometimes even our younger leaders are falling for tactics that, they might excite a base, they might raise money, to be fair, but it's ultimately not very helpful for the end goal, and it pits us against each other. So I want to ask you, since you are this expert on politics, a little bit about controlled opposition. I know that's a weird term that people throw out there, and it's a little conspiratorial sometimes, but there are organizations. Neoliberalism is essentially controlled opposition, right? I mean, how do we think about those things when there are organizations that might be our allies sometimes and work with our candidates, but maybe other times they support candidates, our opposition, or attack us. There's a lot of that. I mean, we have to be real. There's a lot of that, and how do we maneuver when we're trying to build solidarity? And sometimes they're our friends, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, I'm just not. To me, the most important thing that we can do, the most important thing that people who are new to the work can do, is take a job in a strategic sector in an area where there's a good union, or really an intent on going with a bunch of their friends, like pulling a bunch of people and applying for jobs, going in someplace, doing some study groups, getting in touch with those of us who know how to teach them, right, and train them, and either forming new unions or helping be part of reform slates of existing unions at the local level.
Right.
And here's why I say this, to get to your point. For all the frustrations that we all may have, and certainly me, all of my books, labor leadership considers them to be very critical of them. I consider them to be tough, friendly criticism, right? This is like the movement I'm in, and I'm deeply committed to it. But what I think about learning controlled opposition, all this stuff, what I think is learn how to do it. So what's beautiful about union campaigns, what's different about trade union campaigns than any other sector of the progressive movement or the left, is that when you try to form a union, you have to get past the bullshit of the divide and conquer people, because they're in there every day. So one of the stories I tell in the new book about helping to organize thousands of hospital workers in 2016 in Philadelphia, in Greater Philadelphia, as part of a large campaign that a whole bunch of us were involved in, that, where workers won. Actually, the biggest organizing campaign in the United States in 2016 was in Philadelphia, and it was a hell of a campaign. And what people learn in these kind of campaigns is that we had professional union busters, we had IRI Inc. This is not just neoliberalism. This is like although it's part of it, right? But IRI Inc. is now becoming more of a well-known name because it's who Google has hired. So Google hired IRI Inc. That was a New York Times story, and the story was in early December. And IRI Inc., as soon as I saw the New York Times story, it was like all sorts of people were sending it to me, because IRI Inc. is who we were going up against in Philadelphia in the hospital campaign in 2016. Mm-hmm. So obviously we know how to overcome these guys. And I have to say my two favorite words, which is method and discipline. Like, we were going up against IRI Inc. in 2016 in a brutal series of rounds of just warfare in the hospitals, where they had, in one hospital in Einstein, they had 18 full-time union busters who came in to do the massive divide and conquer. Yeah. And this is why when people, like when uber super lefty people say, like, we don't need organizers, the rank and file is just going to rise up. I'm like, yeah, to a firing squad. Give me a break. When you have 18 professional union busters hiding behind management, going in and driving wedges, like looking for every wedge they can drive, race, gender, class, immigration, and driving those wedges to be successful, which we were, to be successful, you have to learn the methods and the strategies that when you wake up every morning, you have the capacity to actually build solidarity. Like, you have to actively construct solidarity because there's people actively working to deconstruct solidarity. So our side has to get really good at actively constructing little action by little action that unifies people, even up against really stiff divide and conquer opposition. And the best of union organizers know how to do this. Like, we actually know how to do this. And certainly not just me. There are a lot of really good organizers in this country. You just don't know their names. But I got a ton of colleagues who I've worked with on every campaign, and we know what the hell we're doing. And there's method and discipline. And that's what the Bernie generation needs to learn. Like, get that skill, get that training, because whether it comes to the political, I feel like we can take that skill set and we export it. So when I get lent out to political campaigns, which we do, right? If you're a full-time person in the trade union movement, your union will pick you if you win a lot of really hard-fought union elections, and you will get lent out, right, to a campaign. And we often get lent out to the hardest campaigns because we actually understand how to overcome divide and conquer tactics. And that's the kind of tactics that people need to learn for us to defeat massive austerity that's coming down the pike.
I know you have to go soon, but I want to ask you a little bit about the difference between solidarity and, I believe you used the term, is it mass organizing? Was that the right term?
Mass organizing, yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I'll tell you what, I like to talk about, how do you build unbreakable solidarity? Like, those words to me really matter. So how do you build solidarity, and how do you build unbreakable solidarity, which is what you need for a strike? Because the union busters are coming, right? So when we have an approach of doing large scale organizing, there's an entire theory we have. One part of it's called going to the biggest worst, which is the opposite of what the feminist movement did in the 1970s, trying to pass the ERA. And let me explain what that is. What a lot of activists do, and this is a mistake, please don't do this, activists, left, young people. What a lot of activists do is get comfortable mostly talking to people who agree with them.
Right.
That's what the feminist movement did. I mean, there were a lot of things wrong. Racism inside the white women-dominated movement, tone deaf on race, tone deaf on class. But like, what activists did was went to like the easy states to try and pass the Equal Rights Amendment, got really encouraged, like, oh, look, we got 1 state, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, not realizing that those were the easy states. And if you're a union organizer, you start with the hardest states. Because what you know in a union campaign is, if we can win the hardest departments to win, we're going to win this campaign, because we're going to save the easier to do work for later in the campaign. Because if you can win the hard part of the campaign, the hard part of the turf, you can actually pull off the whole election, because the easier part of the turf is going to come along with you in the end. So there's so much that people trying to figure out electoral work can learn from trade union organizers. That's part of why I keep writing the books. But method and discipline matters. Having a theory of power matters. Having a disciplined method by which you do strategy, and that you don't do the strategy until you've done power structure analysis in every campaign and every fight. Like, these are all learnable skills and people are desperate for them on the progressive side of the aisle, or we're just going to keep like engaging in wishful thinking and thinking we're going to have some magic solution, and there ain't no magic solution. There's like a bunch of really hard work that we have to do. We can do it. I actually really think we can win. And if the energy that was going into Bernie's campaign goes into people going into strategic workplaces, in strategic sectors, in strategic geographies, in very short time, like I'm thinking 2022, we can cause holy hell, if not 2021, but definitely 2022. And we need it. And that's not far off.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, people feel defeated this time around that may have joined the election this time or feel defeated after 2 elections. But I mean, my one point of wisdom that I can personally say is the neoliberal establishment has never been challenged this way. I mean, they flexed whatever muscles they had, and like Joe Biden was it to defeat Bernie Sanders. But, you know, when you really break it down step by step, have a strategy, understand who you're up against, which is what I really appreciate about your work, whether it's electorally or otherwise, you know, and you start kind of like picking those battles, strategic battles, it's much more doable. And if you win the hard ones, like you said, it'll have a domino effect, I believe, a domino effect. So I appreciate your work. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you can come back on because I have so many more questions for you. And I'm sure
when we all come out again, you know, let's have a long discussion. It'll be really great.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Appreciate you. Glad you're doing what you're doing now. It's so nice to have a woman doing an interview. And a smart one. Of course you're smart, you know what I mean? But it's nice to have like a really smart woman. So keep up the good work, and I'm happy to come back sometime.
Okay, I gotta admit something. Yesterday was my birthday, and I decided to treat myself with a couple of cocktails. And what does that mean? It means I'm not normally one to have some cocktails, and I felt it this morning. But luckily, the first thing I said to myself was grab a cup of coffee, but also some CBD, because that stuff works. Not all CBD. Sunset Lake CBD, because it is an extraordinary product that I have learned over the last year of working with them. It is, I mean, multiple areas of my life, like I live by this. It is literally, it helps me sleep at night. It helps me stay asleep at night. When I have like any sort of pains in my body, I'll put like the Arnica CBD lotion on it. Also, maybe just like take some tincture, and it'll help me out when I'm feeling stressed, when I'm, like say something happens right before the show, I'm feeling anxiety, I'll drop a little Sunset Lake CBD into my coffee or my water or my green juice. But this morning in particular, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna definitely have a little CBD. I think it might help me. And it did. Shocker. I'm not saying that my eyes look great because I went to sleep very late, but listen, YouTube show hosts and other platform hosts are people too. We also drink martinis, and martinis are very strong, especially if you've been on a cleansing diet for the last 2 weeks like myself. It hit me very hard. But I'm really grateful to Sunset Lake CBD. They are, if you don't know about them already, because you watch our show, but Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD directly from their farm in Vermont that used to be a Ben & Jerry's farm to your door. Good juju on that farm, right? Because of Ben & Jerry's. Not only that, they pay their employees a minimum wage of $15 an hour, and their employees own the majority of their company. And of course, they support shows like our show, The David Pakman Show, and The Majority Report. But I mean, all sorts of products. They've got tinctures, they've got salves, they've got lotions, they've got gummies. There's dog biscuits. There's so many. There's coffee. Coffee's awesome because you drink the coffee and you don't get the jitters because it calms you down. My mom swears by it. My whole family is like really into Sunset Lake. I hope they're using the promo code. I'm not even sure if they are, but you got to make sure to use that promo code because then we know that they know that we sent you there. But if you go to sunsetlakecbd.com and you type in and you want to order something or many things, type in Nomi, Nomi, and you will get 20% off of your order. Type in Nomi at sunsetlakecbd.com and you will get 20% off of your entire order. I've tried other CBD products. They're expensive and they haven't really worked. But this works and the prices are very reasonable and then they have discounts, always have promotions. Go to sunsetlakecbd.com, type in Nomi and you'll get 20% off of your order.
What is the work that actually is required to keep all of us alive and going, whether that be the teachers or whether that be, the Hunts Point grocery workers, right, who do the distribution of the groceries that we all buy at our grocery stores in New York City, like the essential work that we don't even notice half the time because we don't even know where it happens, but that exists to keep us going. The delivery drivers, the mail, the U.S. Postal Service, which, they've been trying to destroy for decades, all of this work that suddenly we have a moment to appreciate in a different way. And of course, that hasn't shaken out in it being paid better in a lot of cases, or it was temporarily paid better. And then, the bosses yank that back as quickly as they can. And we've also had sort of experiences with like, oh my goodness, the government can just send everybody a check. It turns out. Wow. Okay. Like we have a lot of information, a lot of things that they said weren't possible became possible briefly when we were in an emergency. And they've been trying to sort of squish that back down since, lower our expectations back down. Right. And so that's the fight going forward, right, is to not forget the things that happened in those moments, to not forget that there was a moment where cities were opening up hotels to house the homeless, and to not forget that they could just send everybody a check, that unemployment benefits could actually be at a livable level, that we could actually consider what work is essential to keep us going and what work is maybe not essential and maybe we don't need it at all.
And what would that be? What would some examples of non-essential labor be?
Oh, well, I'm not that far from Wall Street. So I think we could start there. That would be, we could eliminate all of that. That is a whole bunch of unnecessary
labor. The internet proved some of that already.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well,
short sales. Maybe that's start.
Yeah. No, it's funny because people have asked me about this. I'm doing interviews for this book at the same time as this, story is blowing up. And the way that some people are clearly doing this just because they, want to punch a hedge funder, which, I understand. But also people are doing it because work is terrible. So maybe you can just gamble enough to get out of it. This fantasy of the stock market, which is definitely not going to work. But the interest in the fantasy is still interesting. But yeah, so right. So okay, we don't need Wall Street. That's one. But other things, I think about the workers at the GE plant early on during pandemic who demanded to, instead of making parts for military aircraft, make ventilators.
Yeah.
And that was a moment where people are saying this work would be a whole lot more meaningful if we were making things to save lives right now, rather than making things to, I mean, in that case, sort of explicitly take lives.
Right.
But yeah, like all of these questions about what is the thing we're doing? What is the thing that we would rather be doing? But also what do we really need to have done, and how do we distribute that work fairly so we don't have a sort of 3-class system where some people are just unemployed, some people are working from home, and others are going out to work day after day?
So if we were to create the conditions, and maybe it does come out of this pandemic, although, as you said, it's about remembering what is possible. And I think that's probably on us as progressives to continue to just chime in and throw it at our lawmakers. But if there was this great awakening, when you had someone like a Sarah Nelson meeting with Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer's learning about MMT, whether or not, clearly he didn't end up choosing that side, but he at least learned about it. Yeah. So there was an awakening. There were conversations that were being had among institutional Democrats that you would have never thought. I mean, even Senator Schumer, and maybe it's just the fear of being challenged. Who knows what that comes from? But there was an awareness that was not even amongst the public and progressives and Democrats and more institutional Democrats of the possibilities that could be presented afterwards, not just to get us out of a crisis, but if we'd actually worked within that realm, we might not be in this crisis.
Right.
Do you think that if the conditions were to shift even just like 20%, we may potentially live in a world where more folks could work towards something that they actually do love, that people who are writers could be paid fairly, that artists would be invested in, and that's something that we used to do not too long ago in this country.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I write this book, and it's this thick because I spend a lot of time talking about history, is to remember that it was less than 100 years ago that, the Roosevelt administration threw a bunch of money at artists. Yes. And it was, we should also remember that it was because a bunch of communists organized a bunch of artists into an artists union and demanded that artists be treated as workers under the Recovery Project. And so, it's a history that shows that this can change, that our relationships to work and capital can change. But it does require organizing. We can't just sort of wait and hope that everybody, hope that like Chuck Schumer has had an enlightening moment, because I don't trust that to happen. But I do think, right now this week, there's prep for a union vote in an Amazon warehouse in Alabama.
Huge story.
Right. The Chicago teachers are facing down with Lori Lightfoot yet again. I don't understand why she doesn't learn, but nurses have been organizing and going on strike to demand safer conditions. Like, there have been a whole lot of little labor rebellions that are adding up. And I think, once it's a little bit safer, but we still remember all of this stuff, there is potential for that to get really explosive.
I mean, so it's really interesting to say that, because I feel like every time there is the potential for a strike or major organizing or whatever the efforts are, if nurses across California right now, it's an educational moment. Mm-hmm. It's other workers look to that experience and say, oh, we can do this too. And so you're saying that post-pandemic, or when folks are vaccinated, but they're still dealing with the ramifications of the economy and the consequences of them not being in safe environments, there are going to be more strikes or potential strikes.
I hope so. I hope so. I can't promise it, but I certainly think that, we've been in, again, sort of subsequent crisis after crisis for my entire adult life. Right. And each time a little bit of that consensus that there is no alternative falls away. And we're hanging on to sort of capitalist realism by our fingertips right now, desperately clinging to the idea that we can return to some sort of normal. And then we've got an even bigger crisis looming, which is the climate crisis, which is not going away, and we can't vaccinate against it. We have to take much bigger actions and have much bigger solutions. And all of this is just, again, it's just putting that many more cracks in this belief that there isn't a better way to do things.
Wall Street's not going to solve the climate crisis.
Wall Street is not going to solve the climate crisis. Wall Street can't even solve a Reddit board crisis.
You outdid it. I was going to say Wall Street can't create the Green New Deal. What?
No.
Oh, man. Hey, welcome back. You guys, it is your support of this show makes this show happen. Shocker how that works. It's shocker that Viacom doesn't own us, or that we're not getting the big real estate dollars to fund our show. I don't know if you know, but a lot of news platforms, they depend on corporate money, whether it's Politico and doing real estate events, or as we're going to cover later on the show, you have major tech companies being owned by investors, people who are in the business of cutting wages, cutting costs. That means reporters, and producing the cheapest content that does not dig into the real issues. And shocker, that content is all very reflective of capitalism. That's why we cover this stuff. You can go to patreon.com/the Nomiki Show, and that is how we sustain ourselves. Patrons are our lifeblood. We are so grateful. The other platforms are always shifting around their algorithms. It is our patrons who are consistent, and we know times are tough. So if you were a patron and you had to cut back, email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We'll work something out. If you can throw in a few extra bucks and you already are a patron, it will help cover the other folks. But if you're not one, please join us. And we have all sorts of specials that we're going to be putting out on Patreon. And you can get some swag too, like this little mug, this Nomiki Show mug. David, we have to get you one of these. I just realized we've been in COVID, and I don't even think our own producer has one. What? Crazy. I know Dorsey does. Dorsey's got all the swag. And so does Professor Harvey Cake. We sent him some when he asked for it. But you too can get some swag. And we're going to be doing some special events. Go to patreon.com/the Nomiki Show.
Some concern right now in the business community, as you've probably heard, an issue that our friends at the Arizona chapter of the Associated General Contractors wanted me to bring up with you, that there's a bill that passed the House, the PRO Act. Give us a sense, as this bill makes its way to the Senate, where you intend to be on this. We know it's an evolving issue, and if you'd be willing to have a discussion with employers in Arizona about our concerns about this bill being a disruption to the workplace and to our business environment.
Well, I would welcome such a discussion. As folks who are listening today know, the way I make decisions on behalf of Arizona and for our constituents is by listening to the business leaders who will be impacted by these decisions. So I want to discuss this legislation, and I want to know the impact it would have on Arizona jobs and the economy. Now, there hasn't been any movement on the PRO Act yet in the United States Senate, but I can tell you that many Arizona businesses have already reached out to my office, and I know have discussed the concerns that they have with the PRO Act with some of the folks who are on our call today. Now, right now, this legislation is not scheduled to come before the full Senate, but we are watching carefully because some of the PRO Act provisions, especially in regards to the worker classification test for independent contractors, could become a part of other legislative ideas. So I would ask all the members who are joining us today to please stay involved with my office and help me by sharing information about how this would impact you and your company so that I can go back to Senate leadership and folks on both sides of the aisle to discuss the concerns that Arizona businesses have.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Guys, it's just about Arizona businesses. It's not about this country. It's not like she's only representing Arizona businesses. It's Brianna, you're a part of a business. What's your take?
My take is we should be passing the PRO Act, and the fact that Sinema is making her rounds with the pro-business community, basically asking them to organize to help me vote no on this is basically what that says. And if you look at that clip and if you listen to it over again, one word is not included in all of that: workers. It doesn't even get mentioned once, and that there's a reason for that. In that, when she says it, she's clearly reading talking points. It looks like that she was given. What's funny too is a little bit later on, there was a YouTube video that was posted as well, because I guess there was some breakout sessions. She, in another call on the same day, mentioned that basically she was the concierge for the business community. I retweeted it a couple days ago. So if you haven't heard that, go back and listen to it. But it's really disgraceful, because I know for a fact, as somebody that ran for Congress in the state of Arizona, that all of the labor unions here in Arizona, when she ran for Congress, asked her where she stood on repealing right to work in the state of Arizona. That was one of the questions on the questionnaire. I can guarantee you with the UFCW, with the AFL-CIO, with SMART, and all the other labor unions out here in Arizona that have been fighting for decades to get that right to work law repealed. And the fact that she is doing this now that she's in the Senate, like she's just completely forgot who the people are that sent her there to begin with. I retweeted yesterday a comparison between her 2012 contributions, her top donors, and her current ones. And you'll notice there's union names on that first run that she had. So she took their money, she got into government with their support, and now she's giving them the cold shoulder. It's disgraceful. And, you know, the thing is, she doesn't even need to do this. She could be a hero. That's
the question that I mean, it's so funny because Arizona has this like weird obsession with like John McCainism and being a maverick. You know what was maverick? I'll give him like a little bit, just a little bit. I know everyone's going to come for me. But what made him a quote unquote maverick is every once in a while, I'd be like, wow, the Republicans are going too far. I'm going to side with the people. She's doing just the opposite. She's like, I'm just going to side with the Arizona contractors. Like, what the... Lauren, yeah, aside from Arizona politics, what does this have, this impact on the nation? Your Senator, Chuck Schumer, you think he might have some power in pressuring her, maybe, if he really cared about unions? He's from a union state.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing total transparency, which is kind of impressive. It goes back to that quote, whenever someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Yeah. But somehow, I mean, this has happened thousands of times, and we're still trying to figure out if these politicians are on our side. And the simple answer is no, they are not. So it's more the question of what are we going to do about it? Sinema, she is not for workers. She's not for the people of Arizona. She's for the people that line her pockets. And it's really a shame that people like her have been elevated to such positions of power. But what we can do as voters and people is organize her out of a job.
Yeah, we can organize her out of a job. We can also organize so that people like Chuck Schumer, who's like, I can't do anything. It's not like I have any power over the two senators who I literally control what committees they sit on, everything. Like, she's in office because Chuck chose her. And I love this other element, and we're going to play another clip in a second or show something else that she did. But I love the other element of like Mark Kelly, he's not taking the, and you know, he's no progressive either, but like, he's not setting himself up to be a mansion as far as I know. Have I missed something, Brianna? Is Mark Kelly, you know, getting ready to play the same game?
Not at all. In our communication with Kelly's office, because we've actually built a coalition out here of different organizations, a broad tent of organizations representing a wide range of ideology on the left, to push both senators to end the filibuster and to support the PRO Act. Kelly's office has been more willing to engage in conversations with union leaders. From what I've been told, he wants more information, which I don't understand why he would ask for that anyway, because the internet exists and he can get on the internet and get all the information that he wants. So I don't know why you would continue to ask for more information, because there's lots of information out there. And I'm sure he has a staff that he pays to do that. But that's what we keep getting told by Kelly's office. Sinema's office has been a little bit more difficult to pin down on actual where she stands and how she's going to evolve. But it's interesting to see how they're both playing this. And it's been like this since the beginning of 2021 with the $15 minimum wage. Kelly voted for it. She voted against it.
Right. Let's actually get to that, because it's not only that she voted against and curtsy, just so cute, just such a cute curtsy when you have to, you know, vote against. No, I will not vote for the $15 minimum wage. I'm going to go home now. Okay, so I say this because she is now looking into raising the federal minimum wage to $11 an hour, guys. And in Arizona, it is, wait for it. What is it, Brianna? I know you know it.
$12.15.
Aha. Interesting math. I'm not one to normally quote Lindy Lee, but there she is on the screen. This is crazy cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I don't know who this is working for, but what I love is we all saw that there was this picture she took where she's drinking was it a margarita? And she had a ring, and it was, I don't think I'm going to get pinged, but it was an FU ring, or no, F off ring. And so the people who make the ring, I love this trolling so much. The company behind Cinema's F off ring will donate all proceeds to fight for increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That is their giant F off. It's beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, but like, okay, you want to talk to business leaders? There's a business leader right there. This is getting ridiculous. But I mean, really, what is it going to take? Is it just going to be running somebody? Like, what are the chances that she actually is vulnerable right now? I mean, what kind of candidate? I have my ideas, but Brianna, you're on the ground in Arizona. What kind of candidate would need to run against Kyrsten Sinema to be able to garner the national donations, which are inevitably going to come in, but also the electoral math to actually win a primary and potentially a general?
We have a lot of great progressives. There's some current people serving at the state legislature that I think would be great, like Senator Martin Casada.
I love Martin. Oh my goodness. He would be at the top of my list. Okay,
he's
sorry.
Great. He'd be at the top of my list too. Somebody that has name ID and has built a reputation for passing progressive legislation, or at least standing up for progressives and people, more or less, not just progressives. Martin has done that. I think he'd be a great candidate. And there's probably somebody out there that hasn't stepped up to run yet. I encourage them, like a labor leader would be great. And I have a few people in mind. I don't want to name drop anyone, but I think they'd be great. If they're tuning in, they know who they are, because we've had conversations about running for office. Those would be my picks.
Lauren, you've run against a well-known woman, Carolyn Maloney, and you know how hard it is to run against somebody who the establishment supports. And, it's a tough one because in that race in particular, because the district is diverse, and the district you ran in is the Upper East Side as well, so it's very wealthy. I think some of the dynamics are seemingly similar with this Senate race in Kyrsten Sinema, in that, okay, if someone's going to run, they've got to understand they're going to have Emily's List power against them, the DSCC against them. So how do you, what would you say as someone who's done this? What kind of candidate should we be looking for? Basically, we're just scouting on air. No big deal.
I love Brianna's idea of a labor leader. I think that's an incredible reason to fight against cinema, is her direct attacks on workers in the state and across the country. I also think we need somebody who's going to inspire people to vote if they haven't in 10 years. And the last few elections have been really upsetting in terms of if you're really passionate about a candidate, it's easy to see your voice get squashed. But the thing is, somebody who can remind them that every single vote matters, and that it matters that they get to the polls, and it matters that people give them $1. Because if 300,000 people give them $1, it truly goes to good use. So I think it just has to be somebody who really has a movement already kind of behind them. And I say the same about, I would love to see Chuck Schumer primaried, but it has to be somebody that has name recognition already. This is not a time to build your platform for the first time. We actually have to get these people out of office.
And also, it's not just that. It's that when you have the reason why Cynthia Nixon, it was such a big deal, is she was able to get earned media, which is very hard. So whatever she couldn't do in terms of ads and raising the money to buy the ads, and she did eventually, but she was running against somebody with a massive war chest and massive name ID, and and we know what the results were. But she transformed the conversation, and helped get the IDC out. But it's the same thing. It's like, look at they need to be able to kind of do some things that an average person, it's just very hard on a statewide level. I'm really grateful that we've gotten to know each other over the last, I guess it's a year now. Like, I met you at our live event in March of 2020. It was our first live event. We just launched the show. We did it. It's our only live event. We did it in Los Angeles, in which Michael came out and was one of our guests on stage and was brilliant as usual. But it was like we all thought it was gonna be so much fun, and I was like, it sold out, and we were people came. It was amazing, but the room was dark because it was Super Tuesday, and Bernie Sanders did not do as well as a lot of people expected. And so, we went backstage. We're like, all right, we've got to make people feel good. But it was hard, man. It was a hard day.
Yeah. I was impressed at how quickly Michael pivoted personally into trying to, similar to the article Matt Karp put out many months later in Jacobin, kind of outlining, victories, what could have been done better, exactly where things went. I felt like Michael was instantaneously kind of mentally doing that, and then choosing to lead with, This is a big shift. And I was pretty impressed, because I personally was just sitting, and it was all young people, and then the only boomers there were, it's in my experience with the Bernie campaign. I don't know if this is like kosher to say or not, but it's most of the boomers that are involved. It's because they need health insurance. It's because they didn't play into the game of corporate, criminal greed, and it was serious stakes. And I remember just looking down the row at everyone's face and just thinking like, this is so personal and so scary.
It was I've never done a live event like that before, where we go in feeling super excited, and you're just like, you can feel people processing things on stage. It's like being in a newsroom when like a live event happens in which nobody's ever experienced, where there's a pandemic or a terrorist attack or a death or something profound like that. And he as always was able to just, I don't know, he had something in his like spirit, his personality, that just was able to kind of take the perspective out of it. And I think he just recognized, as a figure in media, as a figure on stage, his guiding force. I mean, even when you're he and so many others, myself included, had spent 5 years campaigning for Bernie and putting so much hope into him. And at that point, I think we all thought that he was doing really well, and just to be shocked like that. So it was nice to have him there.
Yeah.
So tell us this legacy project. I mean, it's been, Michael passed in July 20th, if I recall.
It's going up on 7 months. This February 20th.
February 20th. It'll be 7 months. And you have, he had this very popular channel on YouTube, and of course on Patreon and podcast form. And he was at Jacobin and had all these different projects underway. How did you decide to put this together?
Well, it's a bit all over the place in terms of like you mentioned, there was a lot going on. I think kind of like the first step, I'll try and make this as concise and quick, but kind of the first step was, kind of a conversation between Matt, David, and I about how to like best transition out of, doing, the Oprah Winfrey show without Oprah. That's the lamest example I could come up with, but you know what I mean? It was this like very challenging thing, because Michael's set of politics and analysis and humor and relationships were very specific to Michael, and no one can really do Michael's show in lieu of Michael. And we wanted to figure out a nice transition where we could set up, give Matt and David the platform and space to really create a show that was 100% their own, and they could really dig in and kind of continue a lot of the work that they were doing with Michael, but not under the weight of, it's really heavy that that music comes on, the graphic comes on, it's his name, it's quite a responsibility. And so that was kind of part of, and that worked out really beautifully. And you guys should definitely check out their work. They're doing a really great job. And then the legacy part of it was, how do we, Michael's passing brought a lot of media attention, a lot of new people wanting to learn about him and learn about his work and who he was, and people want to know his story. And his story as a young person growing up in America is a little bit of it's both kind of a lot of people's stories, and it's also a bit of an unusual story. And I want to do work that I want to make a documentary film, and I'm actually starting my own show about his life called The Brief and Wondrous Life of Michael Brooks, to kind of honor and celebrate Michael the person. And then the tribute series that you mentioned is a series of roundtable discussions that Professor Russell Spriglia, friend of Michael's, kind of had the vision to do. And he was thinking it'd be one academic weekend. And I called him. I was like, I don't think anyone wants to be on Zoom for 48 hours, but what if we, make this a weekly event? And we're hoping that has, I jokingly refer to it as like socialist Davos. I hope that has an ongoing, like we can all gather and think about global solidarity. And I just always have Michael's voice ringing in my head. Just every person should just have dignity and respect. And, I feel like that was really at the core of his philosophy and his project. So all of these different moving pieces, and everyone can go and check out the Patreon. So I'm not just blabbing on and on.
Those photos, man.
Yeah. Little Michael.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, can I talk to you a little bit about, if you're comfortable with it, just sort of Michael's growth in politics, like how he, I know you're going to touch on this with The Brief and Wondrous Life of Michael Brooks, which is just so beautiful. I love that. But I mean, as his sister, I was watching him since he started at the Majority Report and knew him through many of those years, and just his evolution. He was just so sharp. Last year of his life, like, he was just so sharp and so focused, and at the same time, like, spiritual. It was this beautiful kind of, you don't see a lot of that in this space. I mean, it's a really rough space to be in, to be honest. I mean, when you're in media, the pace is so insane. You don't have a lot of time to think and process, let alone read. Just personally, like, that's why this idea of the book club is important to me, because I want to spend more time going deeper into work. And he just always, every time I talked to him, I just felt like he was always going deeper into work, deeper into his self, and keeping up with the fucking insane news cycle that we're living in, and keeping up with the show, which, pulling back the curtain a little bit, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. And yet he found this balance to me, and I'm sure, he was nowhere near where he wanted to go with it, but among folks that I know in this space, he handled it with a lot of grace. I mean, especially in the last year, I think, seeing how he came about.
Yeah. Part of this is like challenging to talk about. I probably won't get into, because that I think he did work too hard, and he didn't, he may be, I talked to a blood specialist the other day, because I share one of the genetic mutations that Michael had, which we didn't really know about as a family, until Matt was passing. That
led to his passing, right?
That's mostly, it's like you analyze the body and you try and figure out what caused this blood clot, and then they found these 2 genetic mutations. But to veer away from that, because that's a whole other topic, I was talking to a blood specialist, which, one second, I talked to him on Zoom for 15 minutes. I have good health insurance. I'm very lucky. I get it through the Writers Guild of my union. The consultation before insurance was, I think, $687 for 15 minutes of talking to the doctor. And then after insurance, it was around $240. I'm in a position where this isn't going to like derail me. I'm not going to be able to make rent, but I was just appalled by that. So I just had to say that, because I was just so livid that that's the reality of having good insurance. Anyhow, with Michael, this was genuine for him. And, Michael had a really big ego, really big ambitions. I don't want to paint a saintly-like picture. He was very human. I think it's important to talk about that, because I think as soon as you move into the, saint so-and-so, then you take away their humanity, and it makes it, less accessible and real. And I don't want to do that. But I will say is that this was very authentic for Michael. He was always reading. That, even if he wasn't doing this, even if Michael worked at a gasoline station or at a bookstore, did something completely, had a more private life. I think his personality was always that he was just reading and ingesting the news and constantly consuming books. And that had it had everything to do with what he did. And it was wonderful that that was his career and he was able to do it full time, but it was also just what he did.
I mean, but it was something like, I don't know, something about the last year. I saw a different, there was a switch.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think, it's like weird because now it's like so pivotal, but I feel like, I think when you grow up and you have a lot of shame around like poverty or your circumstances, sometimes when you gain success, you feel more comfortable talking about that. And I think being honest about the things that you used to hold as shame, I think it is freeing. And I don't think that's the only thing that was going on, but I do think Michael had a transition where he went from kind of commenting on things, and then he had started to publicly make things personal and speak out about that. And I think, at least with my own experience around that, it is a huge relief. It's like you're no longer like kind of constantly pretending or code switching or and our society has changed. I mean, before and after Bernie, the way we talk about class, the way people acknowledge the just, I even when I look back at like Sex and the City or Entourage or these like big HBO shows from like not that long ago, it's like the idea of like this illusion around like, whatever, take that example as you will. But like, I just feel like there's been such a huge shift with people kind of getting more in touch with the reality of what's happening here in this country.
It was like a pseudo normalcy that was not. I mean, first time I moved to New York, I remember like thinking, wait, how did all these Friends people live in these ginormous apartments? Even with
the
like
paleontologist and the part-time employee at Ralph Lauren have the same living environment. Yeah,
it's but I mean, it's like such a conscious thing. It's like it permeates every single aspect of our society to almost trick people into thinking that, not only is it achievable to like live this magnificent New York lifestyle where you're buying, $1,000 Manolo Blahniks with a, columnist salary in the middle of a media crisis, but also like that you can do it and others are doing it. And if you're not doing it, then there's shame that, associated with in which, it's personalized. And yeah, I think he was able to kind of grasp that in a way that was different than most.
Yeah.
Discuss it.
Yeah, it's funky stuff, and then you also like now I feel like the switch side of it too is that at the same time you also, and Michael did a really beautiful job of this, it's like there's a really big difference of growing up homeless or like never, like not having any parents in your life and being on your own, or being like housing, what's the word I'm looking for now? Food and insecure. Michael was really good at like not like dramatizing or being like, like my sobs, he was just very like, I have a relationship to this because I went through these things compared to like a lot of other circumstances. I was relatively, lucky and whatever. And I appreciated kind of like how he held that, because I feel like that's the flip side of it too. Like the poverty porn of like, the performativeness, and that I think he kind of also was really turned off by that. So I really appreciated when I would watch him on his live streams on the show, personalized stuff. I was like, oh, this is just right. Kind of acknowledging, telling your personal way in and not overshadowing what you're covering by your own, narration.
Well, because the truth is it's way more common than people, like the way that sometimes it's illustrated in the news when someone comes out that, achieves success and says, well, I was actually, experienced XYZ. It's like you said, it's very performative. There's like a porn aspect to it. It's almost like a monetization aspect to it. Or how do we expand on this and make this a thing when the truth is the majority of people have, if you are coming from a working class household, have faced some form of insecurity in your life, and it's just going to get worse.
Right.
Lisha, if you're comfortable talking about this, like what was Michael working on, moving forward? What was he thinking about? And yeah.
I mean, that's like such a large question, and there's so many people who can speak to, like I can't scratch the surface of what him and Professor Richard Wolff are working on together, or what, like there's so many different categories. I do know one thing he and I spoke about a lot was just, and I think he would have been like so bummed by what's happened this past couple of months with all this infighting and drama, but he just really wanted to normalize being on the left, kind of get rid of all of these different like subcultures, categories. That was just, I think he talked to me at least, and I'm sure Matt and David and other folks would have different insight, but he talked to me about just like wanting TMBS to like maybe not even 100% be like focused on politics, and like he was really trying to like expand. I think he was just very aware of just like how the right just had such a chokehold on the normal. And that's not to like, glorify dysfunction or ugly. I'm not like trying to use normal as like a caveat for ugly societal problems. I'm just saying like the accessibility was just something that was like, he was really aware of. And I don't know. I mean, the last conversation we had was about 14 hours before he died. We FaceTimed. He seemed completely fine. I mean, he was like a little tired. And I had been to a protest and I was just talking to him. I was like, what happens after this? What's the next strategy? Like, the uprising's kind of dying down. the police have kind of like figured out their gridlock on this. Like, what is it stopping commerce anymore? Is it what? And he was like, yeah, I don't know. We have to figure out the next thing. This is kind of the end of this, but I had no idea he was going to die the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, in terms of the Legacy Project, can you talk a little bit about what you've touched on with this project? Who's appeared? Who's in the works?
Yeah. So, the Legacy Project is kind of like the overarching, like, it's kind of like what, when someone passes away, it's very obvious what to do with their like personal, social media or what, it kind of just like becomes like a tune, it's like, it's done. Like they've, past, it's private, but with Michael and TMBS and the amount of global community that he had built up and the amount of kind of virtual grieving, it felt like creating a foundation or something in his honor felt important. And then it kind of became obvious that he had already created it. He had built a digital community. And then it's like, how do you, it's very complicated stuff. It's like, how do you honor someone and their work, stay relevant, not ever like use his image for like some agenda or some purpose that isn't in line with what, he was about, which right now is easy to do because it's like the people who are closest to him do have that access and ability. It's kind of thinking about like if it goes long term or if things, whatever, that's a whole other thing. But the tribute series, which I think is what you're asking about, is available on the TMBS YouTube. I think it's going to end up being about a 14-part series. There's 3 more that will be released publicly. The patrons get early access to the panels. And we've really ran the gamut of different topics. We started with Dr. Cornel West and Slavoj Žižek going back and forth about the future of the left, and also, chatting about Michael. It's a really wonderful, yeah. You guys are on it. There's a playlist, and it has all of the, you can see Waz Lambre and Anna Kasparian were on. Nomiki hosted honestly, I really want everyone to check it out. It's on sex and gender on the left, and it was such a great discussion.
So good. I
need to start clipping a lot of them. I know people don't always watch the full discussion. We have a lot of clipping to do, but they're just kind of various topics, and some of them are more like quite, literally aligned in parts of Michael's project and work, and kind of, we just had one with Jeremy Johnson, Brent Cooper, and good friend of, and advisor of Michael's, Ben Beish, and they kind of very literally sort of looked at one of his last live streams and kind of used that as a jumping off point to continue discussing some stuff that he had put out maybe about 4 days before his passing. And then some of them are like, like the sex and gender one, Michael obviously wasn't like particularly like focused on that in his work. That wasn't so much a part of his project, but in terms of like being really like deeply interested in supporting people globally and not letting identity get in the way of truly supporting folks are actually in my mind actually being a feminist and what that means in terms of paying people.
Yes.
Was absolutely part of his project. So it was really wonderful to thank you for hosting. You did a beautiful job with that.
Thank you. I mean, first off, thank you for thinking about it and thinking of me. I mean, what I really appreciate about that is even in my own personal conversations with Michael about, there were some moments where we didn't always agree on things, and it was always intellectual. It was never a personal thing. It was just sort of an intellectual exercise where he even broke I had to think about things in a different perspective. And these are really tough questions, like the Elizabeth Warren question, for instance. Like, was she, I love, you and I are both
I don't like. But anyways, sorry. No,
I mean, I always thought that Joe Biden was the biggest threat to Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I actually didn't feel like Warren was dividing the left as much as many felt. But it was an emotional experience. And I think a lot of people were wrapped up in it. So we kind of went back and forth on it a few times. But, and I obviously came at it from a perspective of being a woman and like, look, there are all these other people who are stealing votes from Bernie and we're not. But it was was like part political, part, and just your own experience. But he was very open to having those conversations.
Yeah. I think for Michael, it's just that he just was really dogmatic about analysis. Like it really genuinely had nothing to do with Elizabeth Warren being a woman. It was the fact that she was trying to run in this ultra progressive lane, and it just wasn't adding up, what she was saying versus what she was doing. The whole, like, you know, Bernie and I are in this together, and the attack, like, it wasn't in line with the, you know, and I'm not saying that Michael was some sort of like, oh, this is good. And, you know, it's just, he actually just really was pushing for a change in this country. And he did not see Elizabeth Warren being authentic in that. You know, I've also probably spent a lot of time arguing with Michael. The annoying thing is that he usually was right, and it's actually, well, almost always was right. But our last conversation, we almost started to kind of get into a fight about something. I can't remember. We were kind of like, you know, knocking heads. And then he said, like, and I think I've said this before on YouTube somewhere, but I'll say it again. And he said, like, well, do you want me to explain it to you or not? And I said, and I was about to, like, you'd be like, you know, and then I thought about it for like 1 second, and I was like, no, I actually do want you to explain it to me, because I think you are probably right about this, but I'm missing a beat. And, you know, he explained whatever it was and his, like, reason for why he thought that, and X, Y, and Z based on, you know, facts. And I was like,
or history or something. I mean,
or history, yeah.
That was like the great thing about having debates with him. And it didn't, honestly, I don't think I debated him that often. I mean, it's like debating, I rarely debate Sam. I rarely debate Michael. I think there's a basis for our political theory. Like, it's coming from some sort of basis, and we don't always agree on everything, and we have different personalities. But that one was interesting to me because his thoughts were based in a very like a respectable perspective. Mine was based on gender and like political numbers game. His was based on like, well, this is what the left should be if I'm saying this right. And she's sort of like tainting that. But I was like, but it's not real. And it was like a brand.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. I mean, I think for him, it was just like, do we need to, I think he saw her as part of the, like, diversifying the ruling class, like, you know, shiny, you know, women, stay in your place. One of you is up there representing you.
Exactly.
Diaspora. You know,
which is right. Also, very true.
Yeah. And, you know, in LA, working in entertainment, I mean, I was oftentimes throughout all this, like, the idea of, like, not being with Warren was like, you know, oh my God, like, what do you, like, go home and, like, sign up to be, like, declitterized? Like, what's wrong? You know, like, it was like unthinkable. Like, you know, what kind of self-hating, you know, I joke, like, the secret, like, Taliban wives of the Bernie brothers. Like, you know, just like, absolutely unthinkable.
You need a voice for that, though. You got to have a voice. Yeah.
Oh, the impersonation.
Well, not of the Taliban wives, of the elite
we'll
class.
Say that for Michael.
The like the Hollywood elites telling you these things. Like,
I mean, it wasn't even the thing that I think people don't even sometimes realize on the Bernie side of it is a lot of it was like, you know, there's this like really beat up car on my block that's covered in Pete Buttigieg stickers.
Oh my God.
It's not like necessarily like always, it's like more just like PMC values, even if you're like barely clinging on to having a good income, or even if you're working these kind of like, you know, salaried, you know, highly credentialed jobs, but you're still getting paid nothing. Right. But you're in line with the right kind of feminism and the right kind of, you know,
identity,
identity signaling.
Don't worry. Just tell that guy that Pete Buttigieg will take care of all transportation for everybody. So that
I literally like can't. I'm worried now. People are gonna know where I live because I feel like this must be an outlier. But I'm always just like, I look at that car. I'm just like, what is happening? Like, what is
just leave a little note.
It never ceases to amaze me. No, I think it's him.
Yeah. It's actually Pete Buttigieg's mom.
Yeah. She was evicted during the Wi-Fi and the sewer free house zoning situation.
Horrible thing, yeah. Lisha, I love having conversations with you. If you're open to it, I'd love to have you back on and we could talk a little bit more about feminism. I know you have a lot of thoughts and you have your own political perspective, but I feel like this was a really great opportunity for everybody to kind of learn about what's happening with Michael's legacy and what you're doing to honor his work. And it's beautiful. And also it's like you have your own career and life and now you've been putting Michael's legacy, equally as important in your life in terms of time. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Can I say one last thing?
Of course.
I listen to a lot of Democracy Now! She's like, you have 3 seconds. Michael and I had a lot of plans to collaborate together, and we kind of worked in parallel career, paths. And I think Michael was trying to figure out how to make something entirely of his own on his own grounds and make it more mainstream. And I've spent a lot of time, trying to figure out how to make things that you are working with Netflix or Disney or whatever, and trying to, pull what's possible in those realms. And we always planned on collaborating on films or documentaries. And Michael was really pushing me to start my own podcast. So some of this is kind of like my last way of ever getting to in any way collaborate with my brother. So it's maybe in some ways like it's like something that I always thought was going to happen, and now it's happening in this really challenging way. But it feels like my last chance to like make it happen. So I'm grateful for the wonderful fans and friends and community that he built that is supporting that. And in some ways it feels like kind of like a gift from him. So, yeah.
We love Michael so much. I mean, personally, he made such a big impact on my life. I mean, he not only were we friends before I ran for office and then would go on his show and Majority Report, but he showed up to everything, in the middle of the worst winter in New York, campaigning for me and believing in me and having conversations and then afterwards showing up for so many different candidates and having them on his show and just giving people a chance and, practicing what he preached on the ground. And that's not happening enough in media, just in general, and definitely not enough in this media space that we live in. And so I thank you. Just thank you for living this out and gifting his fans and the world now that so many people, as you mentioned at the top, learned about Michael, and unfortunately with his passing, being such a big story, but they're learning about him now. And so, we're just grateful to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the show. And just trying to get smarter and build better analysis now that Michael's gone. So also, on my own path, I definitely do not know everything by any means. Feel like every day I'm expanding what I knew and what I thought. So if I said anything insane over the last 20 minutes, forgive me. We're all growing, and I might have a completely different take tomorrow.
This is Femme Friday. That was a very gendered thing to say. You are brilliant. What would Michael do? Would Michael ever say that? No,
but Michael did authentically, he was more of an expert in some of the, you know what I mean? There are the things I think more expertise. And I feel like it's just been an unusual situation where I've said this before too. It's I feel like I kind of went on this show to kind of hold my brother's space. And I immediately was in the space where everyone thought I was way smarter and way stupider than I am. And I literally sometimes at the beginning of the week will listen to something or read something, by the end of the week have right now I'm really getting deep into the difference of direct action and helping a cause versus charity, just the inner workings of virtue signaling versus actually spreading awareness, I'm just trying to get cleaner on these things. I feel like Michael was just innately just had really sharp analysis on all of it.
Well, it was his life's work, so don't beat yourself up.
Oh,
we're all learning.
Totally.
Lisha Brooks, we love you. Come back on.
Great. Yeah,
let's talk politics together.
Okay, sorry. No, that was a Femme Friday. That would have been the
oh my God, I'm sorry. No, you're sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank you for having me. Sorry that I came on. Okay.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s and married, and my son was just born, basically, and our mother died suddenly. Aneurysm burst in her brain. My youngest sister was 12. I did not know what the hell we were going to do because I was a student. I was a sophomore at the time at Cuyahoga Community College, trying to become a cycle breaker, and my mother died on the system of welfare. So when people rail against safety nets, I'm like, hold on here. But for a safety net, I don't know where I would be or my other siblings. When people rail against making investments in the everyday people of this nation, it pains me greatly, and I express it in those ways because I know how having safety nets and having people believe in you and having people give you second chances, third chances, fourth chances, fifth chances, what that can mean to change somebody's life. That's why College for All matters so much to me, because I am first generation. My son was second generation, breaking the cycle. Oh my God, no, man, I could just go on and on. So I feel deeply. I love deeply, and it is the hell-raising humanitarian in me that pushes me to continue to be of service to the people. I think my mother would be proud. All 7 of her children are successful in our own right. Nobody is the same, but in our own right, I believe that my mother would be very, very proud of us.
I know you well, and I know more about your story. And I remember, if I can share something personally, I hope it's not too personal, but we were on the road somewhere in some hotel lobby. I can't remember which Bernie campaign or
been in many.
See, I have no idea. But your husband was there, and your husband is, oh my God, if there is a fan of SNT and you have thousands and thousands of fans, it is your husband. And I don't know, I think you were like getting ready, and we were just sitting there chatting. I said, how'd you guys meet? And he told me how he saw you in the window at your employer, and he just stopped in, and you were like, who are you? And he beams about how you've been able to build from the hardships, come out like a phoenix, like the phoenix, right?
Yeah.
And enter politics and I don't know how many people know about like Ohio politics. It's rough. It's not an easy place to work your way through and in. And what was the origin point? Like how did you go from fighting for your family into fighting for your community through the political landscape?
Oh, college changed everything for me. I mean, being able to be a part of groups, student activities. I was once the editor of the Mosaic student newspaper. I always reminisce towards the end of the year. Sometimes you look back in your life and like, wow, I did this, I did that. But, just having those starting points and those points where you can cultivate and your gifts can begin to reveal themselves. It was activism in me then. I remember some protests I led as a student. I am just cracking my own self up just thinking about those things. But when I went to Cleveland State University, I was a part of a group called Students for Positive Action. And one of my dearest friends, Dr. Ronnie Dunn, who we graduated together, he kept going, got that PhD, but he's a college professor now. And I bring him up because we were partners in that group with some of others of our colleagues. And we decided that we just believed that people could change their lives by voting. Imagine that. And one of the first things we did as a group was to help to register voters in the city of Cleveland. In one neighborhood in particular, it was the Huff neighborhood. It was one of the poorest neighborhoods in our city. It still is, unfortunately, right now to this day. But that experience helped us to develop our leadership skills and abilities, and also know that to whom much is given, much is required. Not that I had a lot in terms of money, but I did have the opportunity to go to college, to be in college at that time, and really, oh my God, so much wanted to give back. So that was one of my first lessons. I got a chance to learn from one of the great, she is certainly in the sister circle of a Fannie Lou Hamer. Her name is Fannie M. Lewis, ironically from the city of Cleveland. She has since passed away, but she served on that city council for over 30 years. And she really taught us through watching her and being in her presence what true service to people meant. She did not, whatever she thought was right, whether other people thought it was wrong or not, whether it was along a party line or not, she stood for it. So she is in that sisterhood of my grandmother, or the Fannie M. Lewis's, or the Shirley Chisholms, which brings me to this point. I don't worship at the altar of any man or any woman or any party. I worship God and I serve the people. So if folks want to know what kind of Democrat I am, because I get that a lot as the people who are rising up against me want to say, oh, she's not real. Well, I'm going to tell you what kind I am. I am a Fannie Lou Hamer Democrat. I am a Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed. I am of the FDR wing of the Democratic Party when he challenged the wealthiest people of his day and said to them, maybe not verbatim, but basically, I welcome your hatred, as he was pushing and trying to be a champion for policy positions that would change people's lives. Know me. And I know I'm preaching to the choir and talking to you about this.
You're firing me up right
now more than ever. The pain was there before the pandemic. But to quote my grandmother, the pain is sure enough here now. And anybody with political power who doesn't have the intestinal fortitude, I'm trying to keep it PG, to use that power on behalf of the poor, the working poor, and the middle class, we got to question their service, we just got to. I'm sorry.
And no, you don't say sorry to me. I just had right before you came on, I lost it on what's happening at the Capitol. And it was the perfect motivation for really recognizing, like, it is, which side are you on, right? Which side of the Democratic Party are you on? Which side of society are you on? Where are you channeling your energy? We That's all right. have so many minutes on this planet. We all have so much energy, and how are you using it? Are you using it in the most constructive way? And I think, what's so inspiring about this moment, because let's not lose in the chaos of this moment, there is a lot of inspiration in that we have, despite the fact that you and I both know very well, the Democratic Party has completely pulled resources from organizing around the country of the last 10 years. And what that leaves is vacuums for the right wing to swoop in, and it leaves vacuums for extremist movements to rise up, and we lose seats, right? But what we've done in the Bernie years, in the recent Bernie years, is we have decided, well, we're not relying on the party. We're going to do it on our own. So DSA grows, right. and community organizations. Party all of these organizations come together and they start organizing on the ground and do mutual aid. And of course, people run for office. Yes. And so that's inspiring.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
That's all, folks. We will be back on Tuesday for the Rockfin exclusive TNS Live. Nomiki will be back on Tuesday. And then for Solidarity Wednesday with Ben Dixon as usual. Have a great weekend.